All right, in this talk, I'm going to talk about antisocial behavior and aggression. And if prosocial behavior was doing something kind or helpful, then antisocial behavior is any behavior that disrupts the 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 relationships or the way the functioning is going between people in a community. So it's disrupting, causing a negative impact on the society. And one type of antisocial behavior is aggression. And at least hostile aggression is behavior that has the intent to harm or to dominate another person. Bullying is a type of this aggression, a proactive type of aggression. So, in the next few slides, I'm going to break down some terms about aggression so that we can think about it in a little more depth. And when we think of a developmental sequence, um, we see some behaviors early on with toddlers that look like aggression, but they're not really what we would think of as aggression in terms of that sort of adult understanding that aggression is something where there was an intention to harm others. So sometimes we see an expressive kind of aggression where an infant or a toddler may just be having a their emotions are overloaded and they're just having a temper tantrum and they're lashing about, and someone might get hit but they weren't really trying to hit someone. It's not exactly an accident, but it's a different type of aggression. It's just really the expression of the emotion. That's different than the words that are on this slide: instrumental and hostile aggression. Instrumental aggression is a type of aggression that we see reach its height in the toddler years. And it's aggression where the child doesn't really have the intention to harm someone else. Their goal isn't to harm someone or dominate them or boss them around. Their goal is to get that thing that the other child has. So the other child has an object, a toy, they have a privilege that an adult has given them. They have a space. They're sitting on someone's lap or in a certain chair, and the other child really wants that thing, that space, that person, that attention, or that stuff. And so they push the other child out of the way, or they bite them to get them to move, or they slap at them. And it's real aggression. It's not an accident. It's not an expression of emotion that's out of control. It is truly aggression, but its difference here is the goal isn't to harm someone. The goal is to get that thing. And the toddler, because of their limited vocabulary, their limited experience and strategies, they don't have a better way of asking for it or negotiating for it or saying, hey, let me see that when you're done, or hey, I'll trade you this for that. The first strategy they have is to push the child out of the way. Now we see instrumental aggression decline as children enter the preschool and especially the elementary school years. It goes down. It doesn't ever completely go away. We're about to have. I'm talking to you. For me, it's November, and so every November there's this Black Friday where people are trying to grab things from each other, grown adults, and so instrumental aggression can still exist, but the proportion of instrumental aggression it goes down as we develop other strategies to get those things that we want. Now, there are going to be some children who, as toddlers, engaged in this instrumental aggression. They wanted that toy truck and they shoved the child who had it away and they got the toy truck. And that's kind of rewarding. I got this strategy worked for me. Um, Over time, that can develop into a different style of aggression where the goal isn't just to get that thing. The goal really is to harm somebody. The intention is, I'm going to hurt you. I'm going to show you that I have more power over you. So things like hitting, kicking, or threatening to hurt someone. This is called hostile aggression, and this is rare among infants and toddlers where there's this real intention to hurt the other. But this becomes increasingly common in the preschool years. And by 3 and 4, it's the predominant type of aggression. And we see to varying degrees, all children experiment with that. Some level of aggression is a typical trait of human beings. Okay. It's a typical trait of early childhood as children are experimenting with their social relationships, as they're learning various social strategies, as they're experimenting with feelings of power. Some children, however, will have higher levels of aggression than others, and they will continue using aggression over the course of development. So let's look at some of the different types of hostile aggression. One type is physical aggression, where it's the actual physical hitting, pushing, kicking, harming someone else with physical force. A second type is verbal aggression, which is harming through verbal means, threatening, name calling. You're more likely today to see verbal aggression combined into a category called relational aggression, which is harming others through manipulating their relationships, manipulating their peer status, like spreading rumors or excluding them from a social group. Now, not that long ago, it was generally considered that aggression was the realm of boys, that boys were more aggressive than girls were. And what we now recognize is that boys do outpace girls in physical aggression. That doesn't mean that girls don't do any physical aggression, because they do. There absolutely is physical aggression among girls, and some girls are more show more physical aggression than some boys. But as a group overall, there are higher levels of averages of physical aggression among boys than that group of girls. However, girls are more likely to engage in relational aggression, and relational aggression is more covert, it's more hidden. Teachers or observers or researchers are less likely to see that. If you're watching on the playground, you see physical hitting and pushing and kicking, you see the effects of it. You're less likely to observe spreading rumors or social exclusion. And so that was hidden. And girls have a higher rate of that kind of relational aggression that is more covert than boys do. So the overall rates of aggression, of hostile aggression, when you combine physical and relational, the overall rate is relatively similar between boys and girls. So we now recognize that aggression isn't just a boy thing, but that the types of aggression that boys are engaging in is more noticeable, whereas girls is more sophisticated and more hidden. Another way of describing aggression that you see differences in children is between reactive and proactive. So reactive aggression, I think of it as hot. It's emotional. I've I've been provoked, or I think I've been provoked, and I react with aggression. So you push me and I push you back, or I think you've looked at me funny, and so I get angry back at you. It's that reaction. Proactive aggression, on the other hand, I think of it as more cold-blooded. It's not a response to a provocation, okay? It's not done out of anger. It's not done out of the heat of emotion. The child's goal here is to achieve an objective they have, whether it's to make themselves feel powerful or to coerce someone into doing the kinds of things that they want them to do. Proactive aggression is uh, a little less unpredictable in some ways in the moment, because you can see the events that lead up to reactive aggression, whereas proactive aggression can happen in a more surprising kinds of ways. Now, there are some levels of antisocial behavior that are beyond the scope of a typical classroom uh, teacher or group to work with, and require some mental health professionals here. These are clinical levels of antisocial behavior. And a couple of examples of this are oppositional defiant disorder, where there's this excessive antisocial behavior for at least 6 months, conduct disorder, where there's this excessive delinquency and aggression for at least 6 months. Uh, those are predicted by family dysfunction, parental rejection, really harsh discipline or abuse, uh, conflict between the parents, or parents who themselves are antisocial, and a genetic predisposition. Now, if you think about that development aggression and we think about this movement from instrumental into hostile, there are some children who during the preschool years, they're experimenting with that power and they're experimenting with some hostile aggression, and they come up with the mistaken notion that the way that I feel powerful, the way that I feel strong is to use this proactive aggression. And that is where we see the development of a bully. Their goal is to intimidate or dominate others. Bullying is something that occurs repeatedly over time. And one of the things that we often miss about bullying, it's easy for us when a child says, "This is my friend," to think of that as a relationship that goes over time. Friendships last. A bully and a victim also have a relationship. It's something that goes over time. There's interaction that continues. Okay. They have plans for each other, they think about each other. This is a relationship over time where someone who has more power, more physical size, but it can also be that covert relational kinds of aggression and bullying. So maybe it's more social power or status is victimizing someone who has less power. There's an additional kind of bullying we recognize today called cyberbullying, where you don't have to be in person. So there are threats and gossiping and rumoring that occur through social media and through other technologies. And it can be just as harmful for those victims. About 5 to 20% of students in the US, depending on how this is assessed, are regularly victimized. And there's two groups here. There's a submissive group of victims who are physically weaker. They have feelings of insecurity. They don't have friends. They're more they cry easily. They have more anxiety and worry. And bullies select those children out as potential targets, as victims, because of what the bully perceives as weakness. Um, there are also aggressive victims of bullying. These are children who have poor emotion regulation. They're quick to sort of jump off the handle and they provoke the bullies. In this case, the aggressive victim, what you see is a younger child who is bullied by an older child. And let me talk about some age trends in antisocial behavior in general, and I'll come back to bullying. So, infants aren't really aggressive. They show us anger, but we'll see aggression towards peers by 12 months. And between 1 to 2 years, an increase in physical aggression, primarily instrumental aggression. In early childhood, uh, in our lifespan, between the ages of 2 to 4 across the board is the most aggressive age. But remember, there are some children who will continue to use aggressive strategies at a high level. But if you look at the average across all of us, it peaks during our preschool years. By around age 3, physical aggression is declining and being replaced with verbal aggression, which isn't necessarily sophisticated at this age, but it's like, I hate you and you're dumb and those kinds of statements. By 4, we see things like, you can't play with us and I, you're not my friend, she's my friend. And a little more sophistication in that verbal and relational aggression. And that increases as children go across the preschool into the elementary school years. As children begin to use more language, we see this reduction in instrumental aggression during preschool because they have other strategies that they can use. By middle childhood, we see a drop in physical aggression, and especially if there are adults around it becomes exceedingly rare. We see more emotional control, so we don't see those expressive aggression coming from tantrums. Uh, we see more social aggression, more relational aggression. Uh, It's more likely to be hostile than it is instrumental. Instrumental aggression doesn't completely go away again, remember that, but it really drops down. And we see overall this emergence of bullying as we transition into the elementary school years, and then a decline as children transition into adolescence. So antisocial behavior is predicted by our genes and the genes that are expressed. It's predicted by parental factors, harsh discipline, more coercive uh, families where there's a lot of authoritarian style of do this because I say so, and if you don't, I can force you to do it because I'm bigger than you. It's associated with children's self-esteem, and this is a tricky relationship here. So overall, with children's self-esteem, this across all children, children tend to really overestimate their self-esteem when they're preschoolers. If you ask a group of preschoolers, hey, who's the fastest in here? Every one of them will say, it's me, even though they may have never have been the fastest in there. They all have this sort of overestimation. And when they get to elementary school, across the board, there's this kind of drop in their reported self-esteem. And they're starting to compare themselves to other kids. They're starting to see, wow, so and so really does run faster than me. And gosh, the teacher gave me this red mark on my spelling test. And so they're starting to get other information, make these comparisons, and overall self-esteem declines. But for these kids who are developing into the bullies, these highly aggressive, physically aggressive kids, they're becoming peer rejected. Their peers are more likely to say, "Hey, we don't want this kid around." But the aggressive child is misinterpreting this, and they think that they are the most respected and liked kid in the class. And so at that transition to elementary school, that overall drop that we see in self-esteem, we don't see it among those aggressive and rejected children. They are overestimating and saying that they are well liked, even though every other kid in the class says, "Yeah, I don't like being around them. They make me uncomfortable." And so there's the link between self-esteem isn't just that lower self-esteem predicts antisocial behavior. It's that children with antisocial behavior kind of overestimate many aspects of their self-esteem as reported by those around them. There's also a social cognitive link. When we talked about social cognition, I talked about hostile attribution bias. So particularly for children grades 2 to 8, children who are more likely to attribute hostility to the intentions of others in ambiguous kinds of situations where you can't tell their intention, those children are more likely to display aggressive behavior. Here's a slide of some protective and risk factors. Uh, just very briefly, some protective factors are parental warmth, parental control and involvement, religiosity, uh, protection from abuse and violence. Some risk factors are insecure attachment, power assertive discipline, authoritarian parenting, maternal depression, and parental smoking. So a little more about bullying. Verbal and physical behavior that's intended to disturb someone less powerful in this ongoing relationship. The people who are most likely to be the victims of bullies are boys, particularly boys at the transition point to middle school. So those younger middle school students. Now, overall, in general, children who are highly aggressive tend to be rejected by their peers, but some bullies may have high peer status, especially those who are called controversial. Some children give them high status and some children don't. Basically, they're able to do something that victimizes one child that another child may think is funny or another group of kids think is funny. Um, so even though there's this tendency for aggressive children to have low peer status, bullies sometimes have a higher peer status, at least among uh, a given group of children. So they may be controversial, high among some and low among others. The most vulnerable children are children who appear vulnerable. They appear physically vulnerable. And so children who don't have a friend, children who are alone, children who are isolated, who are withdrawn, who are physically smaller, are more likely to be victimized by bullies. This is just a percentage of boys and girls who have experienced bullying at that transition to middle school. So this is about less than 10% of boys have been belittled about their religion or race, but about 20% of boys and girls have been belittled about their looks. Boys were more likely to be the victims of physical aggression, both boys and girls, but girls a little more so than boys, of rumors and sexual comments and gestures. Boy bullies are more likely to use physical aggression. Girls are more likely to use relational aggression, but both boys and girls use both physical and relational. It's just the girls are more likely to use a higher rate of relational. Now, with either of those types, their victims have negative impact over time. Now, if you look at that group of bullies, there is a group of them who were victims in the past. So it's almost like there's a group of bullies that were never a victim. There's a second group of them who were victims in the past, maybe when they were younger or when they were smaller, they were a victim of a bully, and now they're kind of acting out that behavior that they've learned. But there's a third group who are both bullies and victims right now. So when they're with this group of children, they're the bully, and they're with that group over there, they're the victim. So maybe when their bully's older or bigger than them, and so they take that out on their victim. So bullying can be a problem internationally. This is a human problem, it's a worldwide problem, and we've seen an increasing need for intervention programs. Some of those programs that have been successful, some of the things that they had in common, one were programs that where older children acted as monitors and were taught to assertiveness to intervene in bullying situation. When there are sort of school-wide or community-wide rules and sanctions that it's made clear that bullying is not going to be tolerated, when there are anti-bullying messages or community activities for young adolescents, that's reduced bullying, encouraging parents to reinforce positive behaviors or to be a model of positive interactions, friendship groups for victims, particularly at that transition to middle school, because we know that having just one friend reduces the likelihood that a child will be victimized. Identifying them early, identifying them in elementary school, and using social skill training to improve the behavior of both the bullies and the victims. And both bullies and victims benefit from assertiveness training, from learning assertive strategies. Victims, because it gives them strategies to say, no, I don't like that, stop it. Bullies, because it gives them other strategies to use to achieve their goals without being aggressive. Getting parents involved in the school programs and getting them into contact with professionals who can support. One of the things that's associated with increased bullying is grade retention. So when a child who's already having problems is held back a grade, they become the physically bigger kid because they're a year older, and so there's this rise in bullying behavior. Just on a day-to-day kind of level, if we eliminate kids being hungry and tired, we see this a reduction in aggressive and angry behavior. We have to be thoughtful about what behaviors we reinforce, build on other skills, give children a warm and secure relationship with the teachers and the other adults, promote a positive climate in the school and classroom, and avoid that authoritarian power assertive kind of discipline because it can be a model for more bullying behavior. So not accepting bullying, involving all the learners, teaching witnesses to stand up for the victims, screening for behavior problems early, and providing supervision, especially in places like outside that are often less supervised.